Welcome to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. Today, Ross Clark from chartsandmarkets.com checks the major markets. He tells us lumber is hitting the roof and Tesla shares continue to rock. He also comments on the U.S. dollar. Martin Armstrong from ArmstrongEconomics.com takes a look at what might happen to the markets leading into and out of the U.S. election. He expects silver to outperform gold, and there could be food shortages in the not-too-distant future. James Corbett from thecorbettreport.com checks in from Japan. He warns we could be in for a dim future where billionaire technocrats call the shots instead of elected officials. Are you ready for mandatory implanted computer chips? Plus, at the end of the show, we'll have company showcase updates from American Manganese President Larry Reaugh and Aben Resources CEO Jim Pettit. We'll talk to Ross Clark right after this.
Aben Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABN.V. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Aben's 23,000 hectares Forrest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at abenresources.com.
Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Ross Clark from chartsandmarkets.com, where you'll find insightful market commentary and timely technical analysis. Welcome back to the show, Ross.
Good to be back, Jim.
Ross, lumber is not lumbering along anymore.
No, it is not. It is just literally going through the roof here. It's COVID and people staying home and people not traveling and deciding to do renos, etc., or deciding that, hey, you don't need to commute to town, so let's build a place that's further out. The demand for lumber has just been crazy. And, you had lumber at $360 back in March. And a week ago, we started to get readings here as it was going through on the upside. I have an exhaustion index that we look at, and it occasionally goes into what I would call an extreme mode on the upside. Well, lumber got into that in Friday of a week ago, so it's had 6 days now of extreme readings. Just in the last couple of weeks here, we've managed to get up to $830. These are levels that, even if you do on an inflation-adjusted basis, we've never seen numbers like this. Now, historically, when you get things that run this hard as they are right now, you've got to go back, and you probably have, in any given commodity in the last 50 years, at the most you got 3 or 4 examples. Sugar back in the 1970s, soybeans when there was the anchovy problems, just over the years, there are not a lot of examples like this. And when it gets to this level of just extreme action, the first day now where it closes unchanged or lower, this thing's going to start imploding. And I don't care if the racks at Home Depot or Lowe's or Rona are empty and there's no lumber. I think we got to that point in terms of pricing that when things turn around, it's going to be pretty darn ugly. So for anybody who is on the train right now and enjoying that ride, it might pay to take a little bit of money off the table. And, I take a look at stocks like Home Depot and Lowe's. They peaked out about a week ago. They're starting to look a little tired up here. So maybe the complex is also telling us something there.
Tesla, does the stock there continue to rise? And if everybody's putting their money into Tesla, will the other car companies get any funding?
Who knows? I mean, here we are. We got a just shy of $2,100. In March, this was a $350 stock. Valuations are just through the roof on this. There's no way that you can make any rhyme nor sense for it. We had good breakout back in December. big correction and big rallies here, but I think this is one of those, once again, where you've got a very select number of items that are moving dramatically. And if you take a look, say, like the NASDAQ, new highs at the end of the week, up more than 0.5% on the day, and only 29% of the stocks on the NASDAQ were up on Friday on what was a really good day for the index. So, really, we're starting to see that this movement is becoming more and more narrowed down. You've got stocks like NVIDIA or Apple that are just moving dramatically. Back on July the 30th, it looked as though Apple was finishing a consolidation, and we called at that point in our report for a dramatic rise to the upside. It's up $120 since then. And the modeling that we've got at this point would suggest that we're now probably within about 3.5 weeks of an interim high. How deep it breaks after that is anybody's guess, but I would think by the time you get to the middle of September, you're probably seeing an interim high there, and that fits very nicely with one of the other models we're looking at. It's been working like a dream. If you take a look at the stimulus in terms of what the Fed and the other central banks have been doing, and look at the market action since the March low and coming up. If we look at the intraday charts, like a 1 hour chart coming forward from there, and you compare the action of the market coming off the 2003 bottom after the implosion of the dot-com bubble, and you look at the daily charts from back there and you compare that with the current action on the hourlies, it is an overlay. And it has been for pretty much all of the upside and downside corrections that we've had just along the way here. That model would also suggest that by the time we get to Labor Day, the best part of this move may very well be behind us as far as the index is concerned, and start to look then for a rolling top. So, but until you start to see a correction followed by a lower high, trend is going to be up, but we want to be looking for that rolling fashion, probably as we move into September, and that's sort of the modeling that we've got out there right now.
Ross, the U.S. dollar, the Canadian dollar, what's going on with them?
Currency-wise, we had this downside capitulation in terms of the U.S. dollar index into the end of July, from there into, I guess it was August the 6th, and a pretty decent bounce, went down to a marginally lower low this week, and then turned on a dime. And when you get that kind of action where you take out the low and there's no follow-through, we call that a spring. And we take a look at the development of this whole pattern, and I put it up on Twitter so that people can take a look at it. This is an accumulation pattern as far as the dollar index is concerned. And so the probability at this point is the dollar index is just sitting at 93 and change, probably rallies up to 95 or so. We'll see how it does at that point. But this type of action where you get a hard oversold and then you make a marginally lower low, but with no volume in it, and so you got a bullish divergence in terms of the money flow oscillators like the demand index. That is so typical of what you see we've had two good bear markets over the last 20 years in the U.S. dollar, and this is typical of what you see around each of the interim lows. So you look for the bounce, and then on the next rally, we'll look for a selling opportunity, and ideally, that will end up being the next really good opportunity for precious metals again, because that August the 6th turn on the dollar index was also the turn as far as the gold and silver markets were concerned. And they're in that consolidation phase that we've been hoping for. And I still think that we've got more time in terms of the consolidation there. And the silver model that we've been working from looking at previous exhaustion type highs, and we've got half a dozen of them over 50 years that look very similar to this. The odds are that we've still got much, well, we got at least 2 to 3 weeks more in terms of consolidation before this thing is ready to make its next move.
Ross, thank you so much for the update.
Nice to be with you, Jim.
My guest has been Ross Clark from chartsandmarkets.com. You can find him on Twitter at ChartsByRoss. Coming up, Martin Armstrong next on This Week in Money.
Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMY.V, and Frankfurt 2 AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
Welcome back. My guest is Martin Armstrong, founder of Armstrong Economics, which you can find online at armstrongeconomics.com. He's speaking to us from Florida. Martin, welcome back to This Week in Money.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Martin, how's your book doing? Manipulating the World Economy, the Rise of Modern Monetary Theory, and the Inevitable Fall of Classic Economics. Is there an alternative?
Well, it keeps selling out basically in one day, so we're now going to end up with a fourth edition, but we're completely sold out again. So I don't know. I think it's just the atmosphere is that people realize that this is really getting to be a serious question globally. So it's been just quite amazing. I mean, I never anticipated the sales. I mean, Amazon puts them on, and then all of a sudden, it says not available. And I thought, what, you didn't get the supply? And no, they're gone like within 3 hours. So it seems to be just going out all around the world. It just really is it's quite interesting. I have the next one coming out. Maybe we're hoping to be out available within 30 days or so. But that's the cycle of war. And I'm finishing up a third one now. So, I mean, I'm trying to get these things out as quickly as possible. But it's, it's definitely a new world that we're in.
Right, and obviously Amazon's the place to take a look if it is in.
Yeah, this new book, The Cycle of War, the publisher's putting it out so that they will then distribute it to Barnes and Nobles and everywhere else, so including Amazon. So we're hoping that they will be able to meet with the demands, because of manipulating the world, we were trying to do that, and we couldn't even get past Amazon. It just kept selling out all the time. So this one company says that they will be able to print as needed. So we'll see what happens.
The U.S. stock markets are hitting new highs and are said to be looking forward. What does Socrates think the stock markets see ahead?
We still see a risk here of a high by the end of August and a decline down going into the elections. But really the biggest problem we have is really politics on a global scale. Shutting down the economy as they have, you would think that they would realize that this, is not a good idea. But they're just continuing to turn the screws even harder and really wiping out a lot of the economy, the small businesses in Europe, North America. I mean, it's really insane. And then as a result, you have like California has a proposition they're putting up to impose a wealth tax, which is, what Elizabeth Warren wanted, and the French economist Piketty, basically. So it's really getting quite interesting that they want to put a wealth tax of 0.4% on everything you own, in addition to property taxes, income taxes. I mean, it's, you know, they just think we're an endless reservoir of tax money. They never reform. They never look at, gee, well, maybe we should cut back our expenses too. They don't. It just keeps getting worse and worse. They think that just simply because they have the power of law on their side, they can just say, well, we want everything you have. That's it. So it's getting to be quite aggressive around the world, and you're starting to see a lot of people getting very upset over it. And this continues in this fashion, and I think we're looking at really a lot more civil unrest. And honestly, however the U.S. elections go, I mean, we've gotten to the point where it's no longer civil. They're saying if Trump wins, then California, Oregon, and Washington will secede from the Union. And the other side is, well, Biden wins, then the Midwest and the South are going to secede. So, I mean, it's no longer just acceptable. It's like whoever, nobody is going to concede in this particular election. It's like it's my way or no way, and that's been only contributes to the tensions and the riots that we're seeing. It's quite shocking. I had one friend who's a movie producer in California. He flew out here to Florida. He's leaving California. He says, when there were riots looting the stores, the police were told to stand down. But if there's a demonstration against lockdowns, they go out there and that's fine. You can beat them up. So it's really becoming very political, and even to make movies, you said it's like collapsing. They get insurance companies. Let's say the star of a movie dies, so they have to have insurance that would cover all the costs of the movie if something like that happened. So with this, a lot of movies that were in the pipeline got shut down, and the insurance companies have refused to pay. They're saying that, well, it's kind of like an act of government or God or something, it's not covered by them, although that's not specified in the contracts. So they're not making movies because they can't get insurance. Nobody will write insurance with all this COVID stuff. And then they would have to have a COVID committee for each movie. And it's just like, who could shut it down at any time? So, I mean, you can't do business this way. So he's like, just completely beside himself. He says, I don't know what the future is even going to be. I mean, how is this going to happen? Go on for what, till the end of 2021? It's just crazy. So there's a lot of disturbance to the world economy. You're seeing it in Europe, separatist movements there as well. I mean, even in Germany, North versus South, Italy, North versus South. I mean, I've never seen such destabilization, I would say. And I mean, before, somebody was elected president and you didn't vote for him, you just, okay, fine, and you moved on. This is like, no, it's my way or no way, or it's no longer acceptable. So that's the very end of democracy, per se.
What does Socrates see for the U.S. dollar?
It still shows that the dollar would go up for a maybe 18-month period. You start to see Europe basically break apart. You have an awful lot of tension building there. In Southern Europe, a lot of the economy was tourism. That's been completely lost. So it definitely does not appear to be great longer term. Europe is in a real crisis because the central bank moved interest rates to negative in 2014. So they've destroyed their bond market, and the solutions over there are basically to cancel all the currency, so that people have to have their money in the bank. And they think that will end hoarding and they'll be able to collect more taxes. And then secondly, they can't sell bonds at these negative rates, so they're looking at the proposal is to convert all the outstanding debt to perpetual bonds. So you'll get interest, that's it, but you'll never be able to redeem. I mean, the world's financial economy is in serious, serious trouble. And, they're in Canada. You have Trudeau saying they're going to completely change the welfare, all the social programs and everything. I mean, you have a major crisis going on here. This COVID lockdown has reduced their revenues of, in taxes. So therefore, then you have a lot of these states and provisional governments that can't make all the requirements or payments for pension funds. So, this is why they keep looking, well, we just have to raise more taxes. It doesn't work that way. You people have to do something. And that's part of the defund the police thing, which is a nice saying, and for, it's being portrayed as protecting the minorities, but really what is behind it is to eliminate the police because they can't pay their pensions. And it's simple, I think a fourth grader would be able to figure this out. If you have 100 policemen, and let's say 40 of them retire, now you got to pay them, all right? But now you've lost the police force, so now you got to hire, the equivalent. So the cost of government is rising exponentially, and that's the whole problem. And they won't reform, and they just keep raising taxes. Well, what do I need for next month? That's it. And longer term, it's just not working out.
What does Socrates see ahead for the Canadian dollar?
Pretty much all the same with most of these governments. The socialistic policies that they put in are really, they're coming to a head. All this stuff since World War II. It sounds nice, pensions, etc., but they never put this money away. The view is that they just tax you today to pay for whatever it was before. It's like Social Security in the U.S. People think, oh, well, I paid into Social Security. It's very nice, but they spent all the money a long time ago. So whatever they're taking from the working generation today goes to the generation that's retired. So it's just a Ponzi scheme. And this is the problem. The burden of taxation just keeps rising and rising and rising. Anybody could figure it out. Just take a simple pocket calculator and you realize this system is doomed. But politicians will live in denial and won't do anything until the end. So, unfortunately, most of the currencies are going to reflect the inability of the government to manage itself. The Canadian dollar rallies against the U.S. right now, then it will flip back the other way, and you're looking at trends that are oscillating basically within 18 months to 2 years. So whatever goes up, then goes down, then back up. It looks to be extremely volatile between here and 2032.
Does Socrates see cycle tops for gold and silver along with possible price targets?
I really still think that silver will outperform gold percentage-wise. It's been rising pretty good. When silver was declining and the gold, on the ratio, it said this is not indicative of a bull market yet. So then that has begun to turn, and so we see silver actually outperforming gold, which is pretty good. And I still think that the silver will do much better on a longer term basis. Gold will back off a little bit here. But keep in mind, these governments, they think that their solution is to eliminate currencies. They all want to go towards digital currencies, eliminate paper money. when they do that, they're not going to allow alternatives. And the one thing they've been looking at aggressively and all kinds of regulations and reporting is gold. The other thing will be cryptocurrencies. They're not going to allow, private cryptocurrencies to compete against the governments. And just kind of look at what's going on in China. So China's been the first, country to come out with a cryptocurrency, but everybody else is going to be following. So, eventually then, you're going to see what the ramifications really are. In Germany, they said, okay, fine, the banks can become the clearer for the cryptocurrencies. That's because now all the accounts for cryptocurrencies are in the banks, so they're easily accessible and converted at any time. And you have to understand what government is different than anybody else. When Italy was in trouble and you had 90-day paper, they just said, oh, okay, fine, we can't pay that, so we're converting it to 10-year. And this is what's going to happen in Europe with these perpetual bonds. So you have to realize that there are no rules. There's no ethics. They will do whatever they need to do, whatever they think they need to do to survive. That's the way government functions. And it doesn't matter which one we're talking about. They're all the same.
With all the money printing going on, could interest rates run higher along with gold?
Yes. I mean, look, interest rates already are moving higher. It's just people get confused because you look at the official interest rate that government has, which is fictitious. I mean, you can't go in and borrow at negative rates. So what you're really looking at is rates are rising based upon creditworthiness. So, not everybody pays the same interest rate, and it's moving according to whatever they think your future earning capacity is going to be. You have a lot of these brick and mortar companies that like J.C. Penney's and Hertz, etc. I mean, just go down the list of all these companies that are in trouble. So interest rates are rising in the real world, and you're finding banks reluctant to lend, etc. So just because they have official interest rates, that, the Fed sets it or Bank of Canada or whatever, it doesn't mean that's real. It certainly does not pass on to the people. I mean, they have not really lowered interest rates dramatically for anything. I mean, look at credit cards.
Junior gold and silver stocks look to be in a bull market. How long do gold and silver junior bull markets usually last?
Well, we're going to have fluctuations back and forth, but eventually what we should see is peaks going into around 2024 to 2025. And most of this is being accelerated also in the commodity side because of shortages. A lot of this COVID nonsense has seriously reduced, the supply in a lot of areas. I mean, you can go on YouTube and see farmers that had to kill like 30,000 chickens because they couldn't get it to market or anything else. In China, there's already food shortages starting because of weather. You got the same thing going on in Europe. So we're looking at more of an inflationary cycle from particularly 2022 into 2024, which will be more from a shortage perspective. And so you're going to see, you're already seeing food prices rise, and that's then because of the COVID nonsense that they couldn't, produce it, they couldn't get it to market. So a lot of this has been developing in that sense.
Is the economic devastation we're experiencing comparable to the early 80s or comparable?
No, we didn't have this level of bankruptcies. It's more comparable to, I would say, to the Great Depression. Because you also have what we call paradigm shift taking place. In the Great Depression, 40% of the people were employed in agriculture. And, the economy went down, commodities were crashing, and you had the Dust Bowl, they became, a lot of them became the hobos. So, they couldn't really make the transition to manufacture because they didn't have the skill set. And that took some time. The paradigm shift right now, you have a few stocks that are driving like Amazon, etc., driving, the NASDAQ up, but not the Dow, not the S&P or the Russell 2000. So each index is performing completely differently. And the paradigm shift this time has been the loss of brick and mortar type businesses and moving to online. So you begin to see a lot of shopping centers with empty stores, and this is impacting a lot of other areas, commercial property, and then that comes back and affects the banks. So it gets to be a real crisis in that respect. Then we're seeing, because of these draconian legislations that had taken place in some of these cities like New York and California and LA, etc., there has been a massive migration of people leaving. I mean, down, in just outside of New York, in North Jersey, I mean, there's been a bidding war. Houses that were up for $500,000, people come in and say, I'll offer you $550,000. The houses are going over asking price because everybody's trying to get out of New York. The same thing down here in Florida. I mean, I know basically guys that, in the construction business, and their phones are off the hook. They can't even, they can't respond to all the requests to build houses. Everybody's just trying to get out of all these places where the higher taxes are, and who wants to live in New York City? You can't even go out of your house. I know, people in California. I mean, it's, they can't even leave their house at night. And so everybody just wants out. People that had a second home for the summer, they're moving out of New York City and taking that as saying that's now my primary residence. They're doing the same thing down here in Florida.
We'll have more with Martin Armstrong when This Week in Money returns.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlin, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Martin Armstrong. Martin, what are you hearing from the World Economic Forum that took place on July 20th?
The World Economic Forum is part of this whole movement with Gates. I strongly disagree with them. You can go online, and I know, look, I've met Schwab, and he's an academic, all right, and his idea is this great reset. This is a tremendous opportunity. You destroy a lot of the economy, and we rebuild it green. They have no real-world experience, and they largely just think that they can wipe out all these jobs and then rebuild everything, and it'll be all nice and bright and shiny and new within a year. And you can't do that. Nobody can design the economy. That's simply not the way it is. That's communism, and that's why communism failed. So, you need innovation from the individual, not from centralized, controlled government. Government does not create anything. And Schwab's idea of this great reset that he's pushing is very, very dangerous. And it's going to fail anyhow, but it's the same thing as Soros' idea with, and he's joined in too, of this, open society, this idea of a one world government. It's really absurd. I mean, just look at Washington, D.C. You can't even get the Democrats and Republicans to ever agree. How can there be one government? Now you're going to take all the countries around the world and we're all going to agree to one thing at a time? Impossible. This is fictional dreamland. I mean, I don't care what country you go to, there's always two opposing sides, if not more.
So the push for one world government, how do you think it's going?
Well, it's going to fail. I mean, it always has. That doesn't stop people from trying. But, I mean, this is what they think that if there's one world government, that therefore you would end war. Because government's not going to declare war on itself. They never heard of civil war. I mean, come on. You had North versus South split in the United States. I mean, it was one government, and they separate. You have, people in California, Oregon and Washington saying, oh, they will leave if Trump wins. So where is this one world government even possible? I just don't see it ever being a realistic idea. This is just fantasy that maybe they came up with in college when they were, smoking some pot or something. I don't know.
I think they were playing Risk.
Whatever it is. It's just not feasible. You can't go to one period throughout human history and say, see, it existed at one time. It never has.
Does all the insanity going around in the world create volatile and profitable markets?
As long as you understand what is happening. All right, it's not that you have to agree with it. I've put on the blog before. I mean, my father was with General Patton from North Africa all the way into Berlin, and he always told me, Patton defeated Rommel because Rommel had written a book on tactical tank warfare, and Patton read it, studied it, and figured out what he would do next, and he anticipated his moves and defeated him. So it's not what you believe. It's always what your opponent believes. So it doesn't mean that you have to agree with whatever the particular trend is, or even you take Donald Trump. It's a huge gap between what the Democrats are trying to do and what Trump is doing. It's not a question of do you agree with either side? But it depends upon who wins what, and that moves capital, and you better understand how it moves and why it will move. Otherwise, you're going to get caught out there and saying, well, I disagree. Well, you disagree, you're going to lose everything you have.
So if you do understand what's going on, what should investors and speculators be watching for? Well,
this is honestly, it is a socialistic coup. I mean, they're trying to push, this great reset with the whole, issue of climate change, etc. But it's a merger of more of that as long as with socialism. And the socialism side is mainly because what's taking place is that the economic systems that they have set up are failing. They know that. They've taken these interest rates to negative levels since 2014. All right, that's what the book Manipulating the World Economy is about. They think, we'll lower interest rates, and that will stimulate the economy. People will then borrow money, and that will get it going again. Well, here we are, 2020. It still hasn't worked because they don't understand human nature. You're not going to borrow, even if the bank would give it to you, if you don't have confidence in the future. We've done studies on this. I mean, you'll pay 20% interest if you think you're going to double your money, all right? But you won't pay 1% if you have no confidence that the economy is even going to be able to give you a 1% rally. So it's perception. The idea that just lowering and raising interest rates and we'll do this, and it has proven that it has failed. And because they don't understand human nature, and as a result, the real problem we have is that these systems that they have set up and have tried to manipulate are failing. So the socialists they're worried that they're losing everything, so then they keep raising taxes. They want more authoritarian, powers. And a lot of this COVID stuff is honestly, I have absolute inside information that one, there were groups that knew this virus and they were exaggerating it dramatically, and they sold all their government bonds and everything else in January. I know, some major players that were even received phone calls on it. So, this has been staged. I mean, if you look at this COVID stuff, it's no worse than the flu. The people that die with the flu are basically always the elderly, etc. I mean, 92% of the deaths are all people that are elderly or were obese, etc. So it's not something that's, dramatic. I mean, if this was, the Black Plague or something like that, and you had 25 to 50% death rates, hey, yes, absolutely, but this is something much more. They've deliberately been trying to crush the economy, change things around the way they want it, and that's what they've been using it for. And I think a lot of people are beginning to realize that, and so you're getting more resistance than we are at any other time that I've ever seen, and on both sides.
Are food shortages a concern?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be, or our computer's been projecting, and we're looking at that going into 2024. I mean, a lot of the food production was lost with this COVID stuff. In Spain, they had to, throw a lot of the crops away and just plow them under. I mean, go on YouTube, there's a guy, had to plow, just dig a big hole and throw all the potatoes in. They couldn't get in the market. And same thing with chickens and everything else. And there are, a lot of these people. I mean, if I did what Bill Gates has been doing, honestly, I'd be in prison for multiple lives. He has, you can go online and Google breakthrough energy. He's there with Amazon, they're all connected together trying to do this thermal energy stuff. He's got everything, every alternative to what he's been shutting down, he owns. From vaccines to you name it, to meat substitutes. And the meat production should be shut down. One person has COVID, etc. If I did that and not disclosed that I would benefit by that move, under securities law, you go to jail for 25 years. I mean, everything that he is promoting, he benefits from on the opposite side. I mean, it's amazing to me. I mean, absolutely amazing. Anybody in the financial industry would be in jail by now.
Real estate sales and prices seem to be rising during the lockdowns and partial lockdowns. Is this a sucker's rally for real estate?
No, you have to look at it carefully. You have real estate collapsing in urban centers, but it's mainly a migration out. Let me say, you look at the Hamptons, North Jersey, people are pouring out of New York City. I mean, the governor even came out and said, please don't leave. Oh, stay here so we can be taxed and locked up at the same time. You have a tremendous migration going on from urban to suburban. So the properties are rising in suburbia and declining in urban cities. So that's not necessarily a false rally. You're definitely seeing that as a migrational trend that's taking place because of the COVID lockdowns.
Is the current political environment Are there states to be moving out of and states to be moving into in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, basically, you do want to move out of the blue states. I mean, California putting in wealth taxes is really pretty bad. And if you look at what they're doing, they lost in the Supreme Court the last time, but that doesn't stop them every time they try. They're trying to make it retroactive that if you ever lived in California within the last 10 years, you have to still pay them taxes. And putting in this sort of thing, I mean, this is exactly what the American Revolution was all about. No taxation, without representation. So you've left California, but you still have to pay them taxes for the rest of your life, even though you have no right to vote there. I mean, this is absurd. Absolutely absurd. And unfortunately, you're going to be looking at all the other blue states, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut. They're all going to be moving in that area. Once California does it, they're all going to say that's a good idea, and you're going to see wealth taxes appearing everywhere else. Are the lockdowns really about a virus? They do not seem to be, no. I don't know anybody that has it down here in Florida. The only person I know that ended up with it was my cousin, who his wife was basically a frontline nurse, and she caught it. She was over it within 2 or 3 days. She gave it to him, but he is obese and had diabetes, and he had to go to the hospital. And they gave him the drug that Trump was saying people should use, and Gates is saying, oh, there's side effects that are dangerous. Well, they gave him that drug, and he was basically cured within 2 days and went home. This is a drug that's been out for about 60 years, and all of a sudden it's become political. That's not right. Then you had, governors like Cuomo in New York telling people to take the COVID patients and put them in retirement homes. I mean, that sent the death rate up dramatically. And you have to ask yourself, really, if you were an honest politician and you saw the damage that it was causing economically, and you would have to say they would back off. Why are they not backing off? You're destroying, commercial property. They can't rent things out. Small businesses are declining. People have lost their jobs, far more than what's being reported, because you have a lot of students that wait tables and things like this nature to earn money while they're in college. They can't even go to school. It's been all virtual now. It's really, you have to wonder what is going on here. And honestly, any other situation, you'd have to say they're being bribed, because it's not rational. You have New Zealand going completely bonkers, saying that if they think you have COVID, you and your entire household will be taken to a internment camp. And anybody that has visited you, any other family members, will also be imprisoned. And you will not be allowed to be released until everybody is tested. Now, I went to the ER at a hospital here, and they immediately say, oh, it probably has COVID. I said, I don't have COVID. I don't know anybody that has COVID. They stuck me in a COVID wing for 2 days. Now, to get out, you have to have 2 negatives. I was furious. I said, well, you're going to have to call the police and you can shoot me in the back, but I will leave. And I said, why do I need 2 tests? Because your first one, you don't even trust yourself? So, after 2 tests, negative, I left. And, I talked to other doctors about it, and they say, well, because the tests are not valid. So if you're being tested if you have COVID or not, this is crazy. Another friend whose wife had a child in Philadelphia. They tested her, oh, you tested positive for COVID. They took the child away from her. She wasn't even allowed to see her own baby. And then they finally said, oh, we can't until you test, until you're over COVID. Then they tested it, oh, okay, fine, you tested negative. And they gave the trial back after 2 weeks. This is insane. Completely insane.
Socialism and Marxism are being pushed around the world. Is this a sign the pendulum has swung too far left?
Yeah, and it's because basically all the systems are collapsing. So in order to keep them going, they have to get very, very aggressive. And you have to understand, the difference between the left and the right is very stark. The socialists cannot sleep at night unless they control everybody. They're worried about you made more than they did. The right, look, I don't care what you make. You leave me alone, I leave you alone. Simple as that. So this is why the left is always so authoritative. They want to control everybody. And that's the real problem.
Why does law enforcement go along with political suppression of the people in a number of countries around the world?
That's a good question. Eventually, a lot of times they will flip. When they continue to support the government, you have situations like Venezuela. In 91, when Yeltsin stood on the tanks and said, "Please don't fire on our people," the military backed off. When they backed off, then the Soviet Union collapsed. So a lot of times it does depend upon the police and the military. And in Seattle, you're finding a lot of them are quitting, leaving. Even the head there, she was a black girl, and she even quit. It's like, Black Lives Matter. Well, she is black, okay? But she was still criticized and everything else, so she quit. It just really is quite dramatic, but, it does vary from place to place.
Canada has prorogued its parliament. A new finance minister without a finance background's in power, the province of Alberta. Some people there are looking at joining the U.S. What are your thoughts on what's going on in Canada?
Alberta basically really should separate. This has been a problem from a long time. As I mentioned before, when the Federal Reserve was first created, it was you had all these, the 12 branches, and each one was independent because they realized that there was a difference in the economies everywhere. We used to call it the Texas-New York arbitrage because Texas was very commodity-oriented with energy, etc., and New York was not. This is the same problem in Canada. So you had the government there raising interest rates when real estate was booming in Toronto, putting farmers and commodity companies into bankruptcy in the West. One size does not fit all. And, unfortunately, ever since World War II, they, even U.S. FDR usurped all the interest rates and made it a single interest rate for the country. And that's what the Fed manipulates. They never put things back to the way they should be. So, this one idea of being able to manage the economy from a central point is the same reason that communism fell. So what you see in Alberta is exactly that problem. That they feel that they get the worst side of the stick every single time. And they're not wrong. They're looking at basically managing it from what they see in Ottawa and Toronto, etc. And what happens in Alberta, they're just a bunch of hicks and forget about them. They don't consider, they don't respect what's actually taking place. There are different economies.
Do you think Canada and the U.S. are likely to Balkanize?
Look, you have a strong historical precedent that these countries will break up. You join together when it's beneficial for everyone. When it turns into one side opposing the other side and taking advantage of them, then you lose the very purpose of being together. And, that's what civilization is about. You can't have one group come in and say, oh, well, we're the victims, so let's take everything from that side and give it to us. Once you do that, then there's no purpose to civilization. There's no purpose to being a single government. Everybody has to be treated equally and fairly. And when you lose that, you lose the very purpose of a single government.
Does China exert significant influence over foreign governments, especially in the Commonwealth?
China is certainly rising, and it will be the new financial capital of the world. There's no question about it. The West is committing financial suicide with all this effort to be this new green economy, what they're calling the green, the Great Reset. You have activists that have been taking positions in major funds and then demanding that they divest from China to try and force China to agree to their agenda. And all this does is create tensions around the world. I mean, it's the same thing with, Russia and the sanctions. I mean, I disagree with that. You want to bring Russia in, you basically, nobody fights as long as the economy is doing well. And I say when they're fat and happy, nobody opposes war. It's when they lose things. That's when things start, coming apart. And we're doing that, and we're isolating Russia and China. And to me, that's just not a proper way to bring about management properly from a global perspective.
Is President Trump the only leader standing up to China, and Trump versus China, who are you betting on?
It's not as bad as it's portrayed. There are respectful communications going back and forth. I don't think that U.S. will interfere. Certainly, not with Hong Kong, and there's been rumblings that that China may try to take Taiwan. The question is, will the West even be in a position to defend Taiwan? And that's not necessarily 100% guaranteed. But I would say one thing is that a lot of people misunderstand Trump. He was like pulling troops out of Afghanistan, etc. And the other president that was against military expansion like this was really Kennedy. And once he was assassinated, then Johnson went right into Vietnam. You look at these guys, Bolton and stuff, they wanted to testify against Trump. Why? Because they wanted to expand into Afghanistan. And basically Trump said, listen, they've been fighting over these borders for 1,000 years. What difference are we going to make, and why should our sons die over there for a border dispute that's been going on for thousands of years? So I think you will find the opposite, that the Democrats will much more be inclined to do invasions and things of this nature, because that's what the military establishment wants. It's like, giving a bunch of boys, some toys to play with and say, no, you can't actually play with them. They got all these things and they would like to try them.
Yeah, I was going to say, they want to use up the cruise missiles before the fuel turns bad and try out those new stealth airplanes to see if they really work.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely always that way. You can look at, Bill Kristol's book for the case against Iraq. It was all absolute fiction. And again, it was the same idea that, we get rid of these dictators and Israel will support Israel. That's nonsense. They've created complete chaos over in the Middle East. ISIS and all these things would never have taken place if Saddam Hussein was still there. He was not a religious fanatic. He was suppressing them and keeping everybody in line. You take him out, and same thing with Gaddafi. I mean, yeah, they were dictators, okay, but They were not religious fanatics. Once you remove people like that, then what did you get? You got, fragmentation and Bin Laden.
Could we be in World War III now fighting infiltration instead of invasion?
I think there's always financial wars going on, and wars on the internet, etc. But I do think we will look at more of a confrontational side, but I think it's going to be in the Middle East. I'm probably focusing on Syria.
Are we experiencing the implementations of Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, and what exactly are they?
This is really the collapse of the financial system. And so you're going to be looking at a lot more volatility. And we're looking at really there is a major push to eliminate physical money. You can see the excuses. They've used COVID for that. Oh, the money's dirty. You could get COVID from handling money. Well, we've had money since about 700 BC. Right? All of a sudden, money's dangerous. This is all, largely propaganda, because if they can eliminate fiscal money, then in their view, they'll be able to collect taxes on everything. But the way they look at us is that, immediately we're hiding everything, and if they could collect 100% taxes on everything that they think we actually have underground, that they wouldn't have a problem. I mean, they will, no matter how much taxes they collect, they will always spend more. They are incapable of ever managing any kind of a financial system whatsoever.
Yeah, we hear of government managers being given a budget. If they don't spend the entire budget, then they don't get it back the next year. So because they want to stay in power and have a big department, they spend all the budget whether they need to or not.
Yes, that started back under Jimmy Carter back in the late 70s. Typically, each department had to go back to Congress and say, okay, fine, this is what we're going to need this year. He put it on automatic pilot. Whatever you got this year, you'll get next year. But if you don't spend it all, you'll be cut back. It ended up creating tremendous waste. They buy things. There are warehouses full of computers in Fort Dix, New Jersey, that they have bought, never used. And I'm talking about like huge warehouses of computers that were bought in the 1980s. It's pathetic. The stuff that they buy, they just to spend the money, and it's just all there. I mean, I remember, they had the same thing with back in the 80s. My accountant came and he says, "Oh, look, you got to go spend this money." I said, "For what?" "Doesn't matter, but if you don't spend it, you're going to be taxed on it." I said, "I got to spend money for things that I don't even need?" "Yes, this is what you have to do." I mean, this was the advice from accountants back in the 80s.
Are we living in George Orwell's Animal Farm or his novel 1984?
I think it's probably more in 1984. It's just a few decades too late.
QAnon is in the headlines. What are you hearing?
Look, I think all this is just basically pretty much the same thing. We're looking at information that is not being is being manipulated to a large extent to create certain views. This is really an information war where they have done that. I mean, look at the thing they did against Trump with Russiagate. Now it's coming out. The FBI lied. They created all kinds of fake stuff. Some of them are having to plead guilty, and some FBI agents are actually going to prison. So, this has been going on for quite some time. Be careful about what you look in, particularly in the mainstream press. They all have an agenda these days. And it doesn't matter which one you're looking at. They'll never report the actual truth. They all become Pravda of Russia.
What is the U.S. likely to look like on November 4th, the day after the election?
I'm not sure you're going to know who the president is before mid-December, and maybe not into January. These mail-in ballots are being, it's really absurd. To say that somebody can mail in a ballot to say who they're going to vote for, but they don't have to prove who they are. I mean, this is going to be a complete nightmare. And it's deliberate to be able to say that if Trump won, no, he really didn't win, this is really suppression. Nobody's going to accept the victor. It's just the way it is. I mean, and I don't think we're going to know by certainly November 3rd. And it would be so easy to fix this. And, they're talking about $25 billion for Democrats want to give to the Postal Service. I mean, come on, for $1 billion, I'll hire you such a team of programmers, and you make an online way for everybody to vote right down to your phone, and you don't need mail. Anybody doesn't even have a phone or a computer, they can go to the local library. That's it. I mean, it's absurd. Why are we dealing with mail-in ballots from, I mean, this is really antiquated. I mean, and you buy something online for Amazon, they know who you are. All that technology is there. We could easily create an app for everybody to vote. We don't need these old antiquated systems, but this is the way, government is. Oh, let's give them $25 billion so people can mail in votes that have to physically be counted and you cannot verify who they are. It's not something that you want to elect the President of the United States with.
Would you consider a position in the second term of a Trump administration?
No, I have no interest in government. I've worked with government many times. It's a joke, really. And not just U.S. government, there's so many governments around. And I mean, I worked on trying to get Social Security to turn it into a wealth fund. They asked me to design it. I did. Democrats would never vote for it. Why? Because they said, oh, well, when they came back into power, they wanted to change all the fund managers. I said, that's not the way it works. I don't care who they voted for. What's his track record? What did he produce? Couldn't even get that through. I just gave up. It's like, you people are just too corrupt. It's what you get out of it and not what's good for the country.
Are a number of countries around the world likely heading for depression, and how is depression defined?
Yes, this has destroyed probably at least a third of the world economy on a global scale. Even you take down in Thailand, you had 69 million population thrown out of work, thrown into lockdowns, and the death rate was less than 100 people. Come on, I mean, this is absurd. More people, even in Florida, COVID, whatever. More people die in car crashes than from COVID, and it's so corrupt. I mean, down here, there was a kid who was killed in a motorcycle accident. His family found that his name was listed and died from COVID. They called the local TV station, saying he died in a car accident, a motorcycle accident. And they called, oh, gee, yes, okay, fine, we'll take that off there. That was a mistake. Well, how many more are mistakes? Because they get $3,000 for every person that dies from the feds. I mean, when you create incentives like this, the corruption is just massive. So anybody that died of a flu is suddenly listed as COVID. In New York, they listed one woman for dying from COVID, and happened to be the mother of somebody in the Supreme Court, because she didn't have COVID. The same thing is happening in London. A friend of mine's mother went into the hospital, and she died the next day, and they listed her as COVID. said, she never had COVID. What are you talking about? But, they get extra money if they can claim it's COVID.
Some businesses need to pay lower wages to be able to stay in business. What would a universal basic income do to those businesses?
The universal basic income is their idea that they are destroying so many jobs. They think if they just hand you a check, you'll be okay. You can stay home and watch TV. Not everybody can do that. I mean, this idea of a universal basic income is just another form of welfare system. Not everybody can, just stay home and do nothing. There are people that need to be productive.
Are governments in the process of ending free societies?
Yes. I mean, what they've used this COVID for has stripped people of human rights, civil rights. I mean, it's been quite dramatic. And getting this sort of power, it's not likely they're going to give it up so easily.
We keep hearing about the threat of mandatory forced vaccines. Do you think mandatory vaccines could realistically be implemented?
Well, the government is proposing that in Australia. My question is why? I mean, there is no evidence whatsoever that this requires such a thing, and it's not even that lethal to suggest that everybody has to be vaccinated. And the proposals running around, well, if you're not vaccinated, you can't work, you can't do anything. So this is more of stripping people of their human rights.
Does Socrates follow plague cycles?
Yes. I mean, that's one of the reasons we were able to say, look, this is not a major crisis here, and it's all been fabricated. The guy who came up with this program that said 3 million people were going to die, Ferguson in Britain, I was given his code by people there in Britain, and I was asked to review it. It is an absolute joke. It is something that's written for like a child's game. And I reviewed it for people there in the government. Now other people have reviewed it, and they've come up with the same conclusion. This is an absolute joke. And the government flips around and says, oh, well, 3 million people would have died, so the lockdowns have really, really helped. And it was, Ferguson had to admit that he made his data and it's all assumptions. And the program, the actual program itself said you had to run it 5 or 6 times and then take the average, because it wasn't even that accurate.
Is population reduction the goal of some very sick and powerful people, and what could this mean for the markets?
Look, this has been, I mean, you can see, population is Bill Gates' personal little nightmare. And this idea that, oh, well, if they're vaccinated, then therefore they won't need multiple children. And that's just absurd. It really is absurd. And he's concerned about Africa is the biggest, the real problem. These people are still in agricultural environment. They have to, at that stage in the game, they need children. You used to need 5 or 6 children to keep the farm going, right? Population declines, birth rate declines with the expansion of the economy, not with vaccines. Rome had the same thing. First Emperor Augustus passed those family laws, forcing, demanding that men, not remain bachelors and get married. Anytime you have an expanded economy, like that, the birth rate declines. You don't need as many children. You need the children if you're still out in the suburbs and you're a farmer. But this is a lot of the problem. You go to China where they had the one-child rule in. The boy goes off to the big city to make his fortune. left the parents out there in the suburbs, and then they start bringing in girls from Southeast Asia saying, you take care of us and you get the house. Russia, offering women, up to as much as $9,000 if you have children. Birth rate has collapsed, in all the major economies. Yes, it's still rising in the third world. They have different economic backgrounds.
Is tyranny, lawlessness, and corruption likely to continue for the foreseeable future?
Yes, this will be an escalating cycle into probably around 2032.
Why do people willingly give up their freedoms?
I don't know. Even Ben Franklin said the people that give up their freedom for a little bit of security aren't entitled to either. It's just a human trait. They scare them. I mean, there are people, there are things on YouTube of a woman walking down the street and threw a coffee into the face of somebody because he didn't have a mask on. As if these masks would, even do anything. Even when Fauci first came out, his masks do not protect you. And they don't. But, they've then, everybody has to wear a mask. Then he's come out and said, you could still maybe get a particle in your eyes, and maybe everybody should have goggles. Well, what is going on? This is insane.
Where can people find out more about your book and Armstrong Economics?
Mainly, go to our site, ArmstrongEconomics.com, and you can, from there you can find Socrates. Socrates is my, project to replace me. It does forecasting on over 1,000 instruments around the world. Computer completely analyzes everything and writes reports. And not biased, not emotional, and that's what why we've tended to be the biggest institutional advisor around, because that's what they use. They want something that's objective and not subject to personal opinions.
Martin, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I hope things are going well up there in Canada.
My guest has been Martin Armstrong, ArmstrongEconomics.com. He was speaking to us from Florida. Coming up, James Corbett, next on This Week in Money.
Value from success, growth in discovery. Golden Arrow Resources is a well-funded gold-copper exploration company with proven management and prospective properties in Chile, Argentina, and Paraguay. Golden Arrow trades on the Toronto Venture Exchange, symbol GRG, on Frankfurt, symbol G6A, and the OTCQB, symbol GARWF. For more information, visit us at goldenarrowresources.com or call Sean at 778-686-0135.
This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
Welcome back. I'm speaking with James Corbett, publisher of thecorbettreport.com. He's speaking to us from Japan, where he has worked and lived since 2004. Welcome back to This Week in Money, James.
Well, thank you for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here.
James, what are you currently working on?
Well, given the state of the world these days, I guess the better question is what aspect of the current COVID-19 crisis am I working on? And the answer to that is that since we are approaching the what will be the 19th anniversary of September 11th, I thought it would be instructive to look at some of the parallels between the type of homeland security, war on terror police state that came about as a result of 9/11 and the biosecurity police state that is coming into view as a result of COVID-19. I think there are some interesting parallels there that deserve to be illuminated, so I'll be working on that over the next couple of weeks and hopefully have something to show for it around the time of the anniversary.
Do you think worldwide lockdowns are about the virus?
Well, I guess on the 9/11 analogy, I would say that COVID-19 and the lockdowns and all of this are about a virus in the same way that 9/11 was about real estate in Manhattan. I mean, I suppose you could frame it that way, but that would be a very ridiculous way to frame it. No, fundamentally what this is about is the flexing of a worldwide global health biosecurity police state. And we are seeing some aspects of that playing out differently in different corners of the world. But I mean, look, for example, at what's happening in Melbourne, Australia right now, where they're on a stage 4 lockdown. People cannot leave their house without permission from the government. People being arrested, forcibly manhandled for daring to walk outside without a mask and other such things. This is happening right now, and I think that fundamentally is what this is about. In fact, we don't have to go very far out on a speculative limb for that. We can turn to the World Economic Forum and other fora that have discussed this as the Great Reset, or the chance for to establish a new normal. And I think that type of phraseology has been employed often enough during this crisis that we know that obviously political elements are not looking at this simply as a virus that's going to come and go, but as a fundamental restructuring of the way we look at society.
Are these lockdowns being used to usher in Marxism?
I suppose I understand where that question is coming from, but fundamentally I don't think that this is about Marxism. I don't think it's about capitalism. I don't think it's about any of those types of economic or political or sociological ideologies that we're familiar with. It's about one that unfortunately not 1 in 100 people in the audience likely has ever heard of, which is technocracy, which is really what this is about. This is about the institution of an establishment that is predicated on a small oligarchical faction that has incredible powers that they accrue to themselves on the basis of their presumed authority. In this case, in the public health sphere, to be able to tell people what to do in order to preserve the maximum number of lives, or at least prevent the maximum number of cases, or the goalposts keep shifting every week, as I'm sure you've noticed. But at any rate, this is about technocracy, and technocracy brings with it all sorts of economic and political ramifications that I think are at a deeper level than the sort of Marxism or capitalism or whatever the sort of 19th century framing of this debate. This is a 21st century framing, and that's going to take us in bold new directions that I don't know if I don't think one person in 100 again has even thought about this, let alone really wrestled with some of the drastic changes that are going to take place as a result of this demonization of face-to-face, human-to-human contact that is the basis of human society. When we start putting that on the table and start negotiating how much of that we're willing to give up in order to protect us from this scary virus, I think we start really looking down the barrel of the gun at the transhuman, post-human future. In fact, again, we don't have to go out on a speculative limb on that. The Wall Street Journal was recently running an op-ed on looking forward to the end of humanity was actually the title of the op-ed, and it's all about how this great reset, new normal moment gives us a chance to contemplate the transhuman future, which is ultimately, I think, the final concluding push of the technocratic state that's being ushered in right now, where we're going to start looking at the brain chips and the modifications of our what it means to be human at the genetic level and otherwise. These are the kind of unbelievable, fundamental, ground-shaking types of changes that are coming that I think, again, people who are stuck in a 19th century mindset probably are going to miss.
Are people instinctually doing the right thing then when they say, I'm not going to wear a mask? Is it more than just resisting public health orders? They feel there's something fundamentally wrong?
I think that, in my view, the most important part of what is happening right now is essentially we are being compliance tested, and I think the masks are the most visible and obvious sign of that, at least in the Western countries. As you know, I live here in Japan, where wearing a mask, it's just another Tuesday. I mean, it's not a political issue. People do it all the time. It means nothing. But in Canada, in America, in England, in other places like that, where it is obviously not a cultural norm to wear masks, essentially what this is a compliance test. And I think it's a relatively meaningless compliance test at this point. I don't think there's any huge health benefits or drawbacks to wearing masks, but people are being normalized into accepting things that are very far outside of their norm on the basis of public health authorities telling them to do so. And it's interesting to note that, of course, just a few months ago, it was, for example, in the U.S., Anthony Fauci, and in Canada and elsewhere, that people were being told specifically not to wear masks. And then, a few months later, no, you have to wear a mask. We were lying to you before because we wanted to protect the store of masks. Again, it's about being able to, at any given moment, completely, utterly, blindly follow the orders of public health authorities, which is why I think that the resistance against masks, I think, is the first line of a very long battle of attrition that's going to take place, in which I think it's going to get more and more invasive, the types of things that people are being told to do, including, of course, the specter of the mandatory vaccination coming down the line.
Or the mandatory chip so we can find out where you've been so that we can, quote, control this virus.
Exactly right. That is, as I say, we are moving into that post-human, transhuman future, and that's going to be a big part of that indoctrination. Well, we need to know everywhere you've been. We need to know everyone you've interacted with. We need to know everything that you've purchased and everything that you've done, and that's going to be done more and more through digital tracking of various forms. And then eventually, why do you have to carry this phone around with you everywhere? Why don't we just embed that directly into you? And again, that sounds like science fiction fantasy to some people in the audience who have not been paying attention, but I guarantee you that is the direction that this push is going. And it may not happen today or tomorrow, but somewhere, some number of years down the road, that is the direction we are being pushed, unless we push back against that right now.
And does that mean the end of cash in our society? Because, well, you've got that implanted chip. Why not just pay with that?
That is absolutely one of the big pushes of this great reset. Again, you can take this from the World Economic Forum and others who have been pushing this idea. And in fact, of course, we now know, again, this is absolutely debunked rumors that were spreading around before. Oh, you don't want to touch cash. That might have the virus on it. Well, it turns out actually the virus doesn't even spread through cash, or so at least that is the current medical scientific consensus. But that idea has lingered on all these months and is being pushed in a number of countries. And lo and behold, wouldn't you know, this is at the exact same time that in the U.S., for example, they're starting to flirt with the digital dollar. Well, why doesn't everyone have an account directly tied into the Federal Reserve where they can pump emergency stimulus funds directly into your account that will, of course, be tied into a biometric ID database and all of this other stuff that comes along with that? The Bank of England has just come along to say that they are working on a central bank digital currency. China is now trialing their central bank digital currency. They aim to be the first country in the world to really roll out a national digital currency. It is coming, and it has been coming for years. I think this is just the excuse that will be used to transition us fully into the cashless society. And of course, that brings with it the complete end of privacy, the complete end of the ability to transact with others without the government or Big Brother generally being that third party in every interaction you have. And anyone who doesn't see what a nightmare that is just is not paying attention.
Could you see an alternative to cash? Okay, the government takes away cash. Would people start trading something else so they could exchange funds? Say, if it's illegal to gamble in a country, we're going to put a value, say, on puka shells.
Well, exactly right. In fact, this is what happens time and time again when you take cash transactions out of any given locale. For example, the most obvious example of this is the prison economy, which functions on trading cigarettes or other things that are difficult to get in the prison. They trade like currency within the prison because they don't have access to cash in the same way, but they do have access to contraband that's smuggled in various ways, and that becomes a type of currency. In the same way, if you do that generally in society, you're not going to be able to use cash. You'll have to do everything through this national digital currency tied into your biometric ID wallet that's tied into your phone, eventually your brain chip. There will obviously be people who work around that through direct barter, through trading with precious metals, and cryptocurrencies and other things that are outside of the national digital currency space.
Maybe on the brighter side of things, as things get worse, should gold go higher?
Yes, ultimately, yes, it absolutely should. And for just the most basic, obvious reason for that, just look at the Federal Reserve balance sheet over the past few months. Of course, we all know that over the past several years in the QE and QE2 and QE3, the Federal Reserve balance sheet has ballooned from under $1 trillion to over $4.5 trillion. It began tapering a little bit in 2018. And then, of course, we saw in September 2019 that crisis in the repo markets, which necessitated another plunge, big splurge of funds, reserves being pumped in by the Fed. But obviously, in the past few months, that's just been absolutely dwarfed, and we now have several $1 trillion on the Fed balance sheet. So there's an incredible amount of funds, reserves being created. And not only are those reserves being created, but that is also creating a M2 money supply increase, which is demonstrated. You can see, although that was not necessarily the case in the last round of crisis after the 2008 crisis, where there was a huge balloon in the reserves, but that was not necessarily tied directly into an M2 balloon. Well, that is happening this time. These funds are making their way into the banking system, and a lot of them, of course, are being sloshed right back into the equities markets, which, unbelievably, I mean, it defies all sense unless you know how this really works, but unbelievably, we see the stock markets in the U.S. are returning to their record-setting levels that they were hitting before the pandemic. How on earth is that possible when we have incredible, large-scale shutdowns of entire industries and large swaths of the public businesses being upended and overturned, and GDP is dropping? How on earth are we reaching record valuations in the stock market? It is because this money is being pumped into the economy. It is being pumped right into the stock markets. And we're going to see the result of that eventually trickling down to the rest of the economy. And one example of that, of course, is gold, which already has been taking off this year. But one can well imagine that as the dollar continues to get diluted, the price of gold measured in those dollars is going to balloon.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after the break.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com. This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett in Japan. James, is silver likely to follow or precede gold higher?
There are a lot of indications that silver will actually outstrip gold. In fact, it has been on an incredible bull run, up over 125% since March of this year, and that is without the industrial base of the industrial use of silver, because obviously there has not been much industrial demand over the last several months. So, assuming industrial demand does pick up, that will push silver even higher. There are definitely some large amounts of gains to be made in silver, and potentially even eclipsing those made in gold.
Do you think China's government is pressuring or incentivizing governments around the world to destroy their economies through lockdowns and mask wearing?
I think there is an incentive for governments to do this, but I don't think it's coming from China. I think it's coming from, most obviously, organizations like the World Health Organization, but which obviously is on the side of China, as we've seen throughout this crisis. But who is really behind the World Health Organization is perhaps the better question, and the answer would be Bill Gates. It's incredible to look at, but when you look at the numbers, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the second largest donor to the WHO, right behind the U.S. And if the U.S. does withdraw its funding from the WHO next year, as Trump is promising, that would make the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation the single biggest donor to the WHO. So I think that is ultimately where we can see where this incentivization for lockdowns and mask wearing is coming, and that is tied into the vaccination agenda, which obviously Bill Gates is on a very public crusade on right now.
How is COVID-19 affecting Asian countries?
Similarly to the rest of the world, it's obviously had a huge, huge effect on slowing down economic activity of all sorts and travel. And this is not just affecting countries that have been hard hit by this, like South Korea or others that were initially affected, but even countries like Vietnam that have had very few cases and very few, if any, reported deaths. They still are essentially isolated from all of their trading partners because of this risk. So obviously this has had a profound, huge effect on Asian countries, Asian economies, no different here in Japan, obviously, which has shut its doors to 140 different countries that they are not allowing tourists or even visa holders to enter from those countries yet. They are starting to think about opening those borders to 12 of their Asian trading partners. But it's going to be a very long, slow process, even if everything starts to recover from here and there's no more signs of viral problems. I think it will still take a very long time to restore economic relations here in Asia.
Is Hong Kong still a viable financial center?
I suppose it's difficult to say at this point what is or is not a viable financial center at all, even Wall Street. But Hong Kong certainly has been profoundly affected by the moves of the Chinese government to try to assert more control over Hong Kong. And that, of course, I think everyone knows, has led to the U.S., for example, using some retaliatory legislation to destabilize their relations with Hong Kong, which is going to have an effect on Hong Kong as a viable financial center. It's definitely been affected. I can't imagine it will be for the better unless and until China somehow becomes the world's leading trading economy, in which case perhaps Hong Kong will be well situated to once again be an international financial hub. But it's certainly been destabilized.
Are you seeing real estate concerns on the horizon?
There are real estate concerns all over the globe right now, obviously, and I think the first order effect is going to be commercial real estate, and also, of course, homeowners and renters who cannot afford their mortgage payments or their rent. This is a huge problem that is coming to a head. For example, in the United States, Las Vegas is going to be one of the first localities that are going to be hit by this. It's going to have a huge and profound effect on real estate. The only question is, how long will that effect last? And again, that relies on so many different questions as to how long this pandemic pandemonium lasts in the public imagination.
The U.S. stock markets are at or near all-time high. Stock markets can be a forward-looking indicator. What do you think they see ahead?
I think they see more and more and more Fed funny money being injected into the system, but honestly, I don't think this is a good sign at all. I think that this is the last gasp of a system that is clearly coming apart at the seams. You can continue to pump trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of made-up funny money into an economy, but that is not going to infinitely balloon a bubble. Obviously, this is genuinely good news for the gigantic mega corporations like the Walmarts and the Amazons, and the companies that have been deemed to be worthy of maintaining operations during this period. But for the rest of the productive economy and for Main Street, obviously, this is horrific, horrible, terrible news all around economically. So the stock markets are not reflecting the underlying economic reality right now. They are in a bubble fantasy land, and there is only one way for a bubble to end. Well, I suppose it could deflate or it could pop, and that's really your only two options.
What's the difference between a recession and a depression?
Technically speaking, I mean, it's just a matter of time. How long is it before there's no growth or actual retraction in the economy? But I think ultimately that's going to be an academic question that will be answerable enough, assuming that things are not put back on track very quickly. I think people will know what a depression looks and feels like. In fact, there are many millions of people who have lost their jobs already who are beginning to understand exactly what a depression can and will look like, but not quite yet, because of course there's still a lot of government largesse being pumped around in terms of debt-created funny money. When that party comes to an end, one way or another, either through some sort of hyperinflationary event or through the closing of that debt spigot, people will very much feel what a depression is like.
Canada has a new finance minister, one without a business background. We're hearing rumblings that Canada's headed for a deep recession or worse. Your thoughts on your homeland?
Well, there is no way that Canada can escape what's happening right now. Again, even if Canada was completely virus-free and everything was peachy keen, obviously just the shutting down of the U.S. border, for all intents and purposes, is a huge, huge effect on the Canadian economy, let alone all of the other trading partners and everything else that's going on. Again, long-term prospects for this. There's no easy way out of this. One could hope that the economy starts to get back on track and starts to recover, but again, how are we even going to get to that point, let alone the actual recovery itself? There's no doubt. There is absolutely no doubt we are heading for deep recession. There's absolutely no conceivable way that we're going to dodge that. The only question is how sharp, how deep, how long.
What are your thoughts on universal basic income?
I wrote an article on that for my subscriber newsletter called Universal Basic Enslavement, which people can look up on my website. I think you get the idea from the title. I think universal basic income is really just a fishhook to get into the mouths of the public in order to keep them on the string being dangled by the technocrats, ultimately, who are seeking to run a system like that. It's going to be tied into your biometric identification. That's going to be tied into your government account. that will be tied into the digital national currency, that will be tied into your social credit score. And ultimately, it will be that kind of Black Mirror nightmare where you will have to have a proper social credit score in order to receive your basic income, and you'll need a basic income in order to survive because there won't be any productive economy left for anyone who isn't just an automaton working for the Amazon delivery drones. Even then, they're going to be more and more literal drones, robotized, so eventually people will be shouldered out of the economy one way or other, and the only way to put food on the table will be to accept the government handouts, the universal basic income, which will come with strings attached, including, of course, make sure you get all your shots and every other stipulation that will come with that. I definitely do not think that this is the way out for humanity. I think it is ultimately the biggest nightmare. It is giving the chains to the controllers, to the technocrats to put around our own necks.
Could you see people trying to flee to the wilderness of northern Canada or Alaska to try to avoid that?
I think there is going to be some level of exodus from urban centers as a result of this, as obviously people have seen that, like it or not, they're not going to be heading to regular office situations as much in the future. There's going to be more telecommuting. There's going to be less actual physical travel and meetings needed. One way or another, this is the new normal, the Great Reset. So why live in crowded urban spaces when there is rural spaces that are cheaper and that provide potentially more comfort and happiness for your family? Who wouldn't want that? So I think there will be some level of exodus from urban environments as a result of this. And will there be actually more freedom to be found out on the frontier? Potentially. Again, that's up to the people who are actually going out there to, I suppose, enact in their own lives.
Is money still able to flee China?
It is difficult, isn't it? Especially in the current situation, because especially as the real estate markets collapse and as economies start to shut down and nations are trading less with each other, there are less pores in the system for money to seep through. Which of course, most of it being illegally brought out of China in the first place. And as China gains more control, especially as it brings in its national digital currency through which every transaction will be monitored in real time directly by the central bank itself, it will be increasingly difficult for money to flee China.
Where can people follow you and see your documentary work?
The one-stop shop is CorbettReport.com, CORBETT report.com. You can go there for all of your Corbett Report listening, viewing, reading. It's all there for free. If you want to see my recent 2-hour documentary on Bill Gates and his role in what's happening right now, go to CorbettReport.com/Gates, Gates. The entire documentary, transcript, audio, video, all of it up there, 100% for free. It is a resource. I hope you'll use it and spread it to others.
James, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of the CorbettReport.com. He was speaking to us from Japan. And that wraps up our show for this week. We'd like to thank our guests, Ross Clark, Martin Armstrong, and James Corbett. And thank you for listening. If you have any questions for the show or our guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Now stand by for company showcase updates from American Manganese President Larry Reaugh and Aben Resources CEO Jim Pettit. I'm Jim Goddard. We'll be back next week with more This Week in Money.
Comments made on This Week in Money are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. This Week in Money is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated. Executive producer is Tom Allen. Welcome to Company Showcase, an advertising feature on HowStreet.com.
I'm Jim Goddard. I'm speaking with Larry Reaugh, CEO and President of American Manganese. Welcome back to the show, Larry.
Oh, it's good to be here, Jim.
Larry, your firm loves to crank out the news releases because they're so interesting and a lot of things are happening at American Manganese. What's in the latest?
Well, the news release was about the webinar that was put on by the Department of Energy and one of their labs, Critical Materials Institute. And that webinar was handled by our CTO, Zarko. And he did an excellent job of doing so. As a matter of fact, CMI phoned us back and said that was the best turnout they'd ever had, and the most questions they ever had. So that was a feather in Zarko's cap. So and a feather in Amy's cap. But that went over very well. We got some good responses off of that. And today I've got a few different topics I want to talk about. First thing is out of the chute is no, we haven't got the results yet from Cometco. So there's no news release this week, and but we did get notification from the Save Canadian Mining Group, and there was an interview with Eric Sprott in there, and Eric is a member of Save Canadian Mining, and he was very passionate about this shorting that's going on. So, that is starting to get heard of. As a matter of fact, another attachment that I have there is on an environmental company that got slammed yesterday on the Toronto Stock Exchange, and due to a Predator report that maligned them and maligned their technology and everything else they had going for them. So, but what I liked about it was that 4 different analysts, starting with Goldman Sachs, came out in support of the company and said that all that stuff was, vicious, and most of it were lies. So that's always, that's another interesting thing that just shows you what goes on in the Canadian market. That these guys can come in and raid companies, take wealth away from investors, and with impunity, and that's got to stop. It can't keep going on. Now, another thing that we hear a lot about is the company that J.V. Strobel started up. He's a CTO of Tesla, and he has started a company called Redwood Materials that recently relocated to Nevada. And there's a lot of speculation going on about his tie-in with Tesla. So he's saying there's no tie-in financially or anything else with Tesla. So, but they published a employment section where they're looking for a lot of people. And my guess is that they're probably going to have an IPO on the NASDAQ exchange, and I would estimate it'd probably be a $10 one, similar to Tesla's original IPO. And that's, everybody looks, oh, geez, what have they got that we don't have, or whatever. But it doesn't matter. There's a lot of batteries out there, and there's going to be competition all the way through. But what I find very interesting about this is if I'm right, and Redwood Materials does go public on the NASDAQ exchange at a good priced IPO, that will put the focus on recycling. Because we're the only company out there that really talks a lot about recycling. So I always like to say we show our powder, and we've never taken a backward step. Sometimes we have to do more R&D. Sometimes we have to replace parts, but there's not a backward step in that. It's the process is solid, and I think that the spin-off from Redwood, taking over the leadership of recycling, doesn't mean that we won't have any batteries to recycle. It just means that all of a sudden it'll crystallize the audience for recycling companies. And we'll be up there around the top of the list when it comes to that, and I think we'll have reaped good benefits from it. I've seen this happen in molybdenum. I've seen it happen in, we're seeing it happening in gold right now. I mean, gold companies are screaming through the roof. But the fact of the matter is you got to have an anchor company out there that is going to be doing big things, making, big releases, and that, focuses the attention on the other recyclers out there. Is all I can tell everybody is, look, we have a process. It's solid. We put our results out. It's transparent. And, we're talking to a lot of the people that are very interested in recycling, except they're not interested in putting money up at this point. But that's going to change very rapidly. And, so I'm excited. Redwood Materials, if it goes public on the U.S. exchange, that is a big plus for the AMY shareholders as well as the Redwood Materials shareholders. So I'm really looking forward to that. The other things that I'd like to talk about are the big banks, like Scotia and that are getting plus $100 million fines for manipulating metals. And that goes back to the predator trading. There's been at least 2 in the last couple of weeks. And, this manipulation of markets has got to stop, because it's killing incentives, it's killing investors, it's killing everything. And wait till they get around to gold. These are base metal metals that they were actually manipulating. And so they received these $100 million fines, probably made 30 or 40 billion on it. And but they have to give something back. And what I'd like to point out on that is that if you look at the volume that's traded in Canada, and then you look at the volume that's traded on the OTC market in the U.S., they're very close. And that means that predators are having difficulty, protecting their positions in the short positions, because they're arbitraging between the two. And as far as I can see, with the exchange rate in the Canadian dollar and the U.S. dollar, that their arbitrage is either breaking even or losing money. But it's so far it's serving the purpose of protecting the predator investors, predator traders in manipulating stocks. And it's not just our stocks. I mean, you look at even the gold stocks are getting hammered at certain points, like Tudor got hammered down recently on their big discoveries and drill program that was going up in the SK area. So it's not just junior stocks like American Manganese. It's stocks that right across the board, these guys have a plan. Plan is to make money out of shorting, not investing, and it's not doing anybody any good except them, where they personally put the money in their pockets. And I'm probably parroting Eric Sprott on that. But, it's interesting to watch the markets, but when you're involved in it every day trying to advance the company, these are hurdles that you have to get through. So, I think I've made some attachments on here that speak to what I've talked about. And so I would wish everybody a great weekend. Hope it's not all wet like it is right now. But have a great weekend, everybody.
Larry, for people who are new to the company, where can they get more information, and where are you traded?
American Manganese is a critical metals company that, by the way, is spinning out its gold assets into a new pubco to the shareholders at no cost to the shareholders. And that'll be on some kind of a ratio that will be determined by others rather than myself. But we know what we want to get out of that. And we've taken the technology that was in American Manganese on manganese recoveries, and we've turned that into a cathode material converter of base metals back into new batteries. And but that's a brief history. You can find out anything you want. Go to AmericanManganeseInc.com, or you can phone the office here at 778-574-4444. You can email me at LREAUGH@AMYMN.com and contact the company directly. Our website is AmericanManganeseInc.com, where you'll find everything you need to do due diligence on our process and the company.
Larry, thank you so much for the update.
You're welcome.
We've been speaking with Larry Reaugh, CEO and President of American Manganese. I'm Jim Goddard. Our conversation took place on August 21st.
Comments made on Company Showcase are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at HowStreet.com. Company Showcase is a production of How Street Media Incorporated. Welcome to Company Showcase, an advertising feature on HowStreet.com.
I'm Jim Goddard. I'm speaking with Jim Pettit, CEO and President of Aben Resources. Welcome back to the show, Jim.
Thank you very much, Jim.
So we have some kind of action happening up in BC's Golden Triangle?
Yes, we do. We've mobilized. We've started drilling. We've been drilling for a few days now. People want to figure out where we're drilling in that in relation to the previous, the high-grade zone that's called the North Boundary Zone. We've got a good link on the news release that takes you right to a new map that shows you where we're going to be drilling and its relationship to that high-grade zone. And I would sort of shows a correlation. That high-grade zone was unique, and as we headed south on the east side of the creek, which is called the Nelson Creek Fault, the mineralization and alteration changed as we went south, and we lost potassic alteration, and the grades got lower and more polymetallic. So all the holes that we were looking at last year ended up with lower grades of gold, silver, copper, plus lead and zinc. And then what we're looking at now is we're back into what looks like the North Boundary Zone mineralization. It's just on the west side of the Nelson Creek Fault. We did one hole last year that went through the fault, and the bottom 19 to 20 meters was mineralized with just gold, copper, silver. And then our field crews that have been in there early this year have found an area directly above that downhole zone of mineralization. It's directly above on surface with some high-grade, really good samples there. I mean, if you read the news release and that, and the last few I've been putting out, you've got samples of gold, 10 grams to 43 gram range, and silver's 29 grams to 46 grams. Got copper samples that run 1.3 to 4.6% copper. That's on surface in outcrop. Those are samples from outcrop. So that's right above the downhole mineralization from that one hole. And this new zone is roughly 300 meters long. And the grades look really good. So that's where we're starting this year. It is 500 meters south of the main zone, the North Boundary Zone, which was the high-grade zone in the last few years. It's just 500 meters south, but it's on the other side of the fault. So that's leading us to believe that this is sort of a slip fault, an offset, where these could have at one point been in the same area, and you've now got a bit of a distance between them, 500 meters. Well worth testing. So we started that. We're looking to do a couple thousand meters, and if we like what we see, we're going to expand on it.
Jim, for people who are new to Aben Resources, what's the company all about?
Well, we're gold exploration is what we're primarily interested in, is gold, always have been. And we're in the Golden Triangle, northwestern British Columbia. We've got another project in the Yukon. And we've got one still on hold in Saskatchewan, but I don't know if we'll get to that one for a while. As it stands right now, we're listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange. The Frankfurt is listed as E2L2, and in the U.S. QB markets, ABN.V.
Oh yeah, we've got a new website. Really, really nice. Easy to follow. A lot of good things to read on it. Pretty thorough actually. It's quite a nice website.
Jim, thank you so much for the update.
You bet. Thank you.
I've been speaking with Jim Pettit, CEO and President of Aben Resources. I'm Jim Goddard. Our conversation took place on August 21st.
Comments made on Company Showcase are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at HowStreet.com. Company Showcase is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.